Okay, so picture this. You're living in this town. It's 1993, and it's so safe you don't even lock your doors.
Oh, wow.
Right? Kids are running around. Everyone knows their neighbors. Like, it's straight out of a storybook. And the biggest thing on your mind is like, will the bakery sell out of your favorite pie? That was Petaluma, California.
Sounds idyllic.
It really was. But then everything changed. Today, we're going to like dive deep into two murder cases that totally rocked this small town.
Yeah, these cases really shook the nation, too. It's a sad reminder that even in those places that seem so perfect, bad things can happen. And those ripple effects, they can change lives, laws even.
Absolutely. We'll be looking at the story of Polly Klaas. She was just 12 years old, abducted right from her own slumber party.
Heartbreaking.
It is. And then there's the case of Georgia Lee Moses, another young life taken too soon. And the thing is, these cases happened in the same small town, but the attention they got was so different.
That's what's so fascinating and disturbing, too. One case, the whole country was glued to their TVs, and the other one barely made a blip.
Exactly. And we'll be looking at all of this through the lens of the My Favorite Murder podcast.
I love that podcast.
Me too. And one of the hosts actually grew up in Petaluma, so we get that firsthand perspective, which really adds another layer to understanding everything.
It makes it so much more real.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's start with the case that everyone remembers, Polly Klaas. Now imagine this town, Petaluma, right? Crime basically didn't exist. It was that safe. People felt secure. Kids played outside without a worry. It was Friday night, October 1st, 1993. Polly Klaas was having a slumber party with two of her friends. Just a typical night.
So normal. Like you said, a town where you wouldn't even think to lock your doors.
Exactly.
Oh.
Just a few blocks from like the main part of town. And then My Favorite Murder podcast does such a good job describing it, like this feeling of normalcy before everything went wrong.
It's like the calm before the storm.
Yeah, and then it's just unbelievable what happens next. While Polly and her friends are awake a man later, they find out it's Richard Allen Davis. He gets into the house through an unlocked back door.
Unbelievable. I mean, that's just the kind of thing you wouldn't even think about in a town like that.
I know. The podcast goes into the details. It's chilling. He asks the girls, which one of you lives here?
Oh, my God.
I know. And then he ties up Polly's friends, covers their heads with pillowcases.
Can you imagine the terror of those poor girls?
Just unimaginable. In their own home, at a slumber party. And suddenly they're facing this.
It's a parent's worst nightmare. Makes you realize how vulnerable kids are even in their own homes.
Absolutely. And the whole town just went into shock.
Huh.
This wasn't just a crime against Polly. It felt like an attack on the whole community, that sense of safety that small towns have.
It shattered their world.
Completely. And My Favorite Murder episode captures that so well. The outpouring of support, it was also raw and emotional.
It makes sense, though. The whole town wanted to bring Polly home.
Everyone was putting up purple ribbons. That was Polly's favorite color. You saw them on cars, storefronts everywhere. Even the school kids, they were handing out missing flyers with these sad, worried faces just wanting to find their classmate.
It's heartbreaking. And then Winona Ryder, she's from Petaluma, too, and she went on national TV pleading for Polly's return.
She was incredible. Her voice was shaking, but she offered a reward, and you could just feel it resonating with everyone, not just in Petaluma, but across the country.
It became this national story, this collective hope that Polly would come home.
Everyone was holding their breath, hoping for a miracle. But even with all of that, with all the community coming together, there were these missed opportunities, things that went wrong that would come out later.
That maybe could have changed everything.
Right. And My Favorite Murder podcast talks about this near miss that happened just weeks before the abduction.
Oh, wow.
I know. So Richard Allen Davis, the guy who took Polly, he got stopped by the police on a private road. He was acting suspicious.
What was he doing?
He had leaves in his hair, an open container of alcohol, but when the police searched his car, they didn't find anything.
So close.
And because of a communication error, the APB for Polly was on a different police channel, so these officers never got it.
Oh, my gosh. It makes you wonder, what if, right?
It's one of those things that haunts you. What if those channels had been standardized, which they were later because of this case?
So something good came out of it, at least?
Yeah. But think about it. Those officers would have known Polly was missing, and they would have been way more suspicious of Davis.
They might have been able to stop him.
It's just gut-wrenching. And they even thought about asking the property owner to make a citizen's arrest because they didn't have enough to hold Davis.
Wow. That's incredible. If that property owner had been willing, or if the officers had just a little bit more, maybe things would be different.
It's hard not to think about that.
Ah.
In this case, it shows how sometimes it's not about people messing up or not doing their jobs. It's about these limitations in technology and communication that we only see when something terrible happens.
And then it's too late.
Right. But the changes they made because of it, they've saved lives. The standardized APB channels, and then there's the three strikes law.
Right. Richard Allen Davis, he had a huge criminal record, all kinds of offenses. Under the three strikes law, he would have been in jail.
Exactly, yeah. But that law came after Paulie's murder. He wasn't a first-time offender. He had pages and pages of crimes, but he kept getting let back out.
It's unbelievable.
Paulie's case, it forced everyone to look at what was wrong with the system and make changes.
A tragic catalyst for reform.
It is. It's a bittersweet legacy. Paulie's gone, but her case started a national conversation and led to real action. It gave some meaning to this horrible tragedy.
And it shows the power of a community's love, even when they're facing something so awful.
But as we keep going with this story, we have to talk about another case that happened in Petaluma, a case that didn't get nearly as much attention: the murder of Georgia Lee Moses. It's like this shadow hanging over everything. While the whole country was focused on Paulie Klaas, another young girl was murdered in Petaluma, Georgia Lee Moses. But her story, it's like it got lost in the noise.
It's a tough comparison to make, but it's important. We have these two murders, two young girls, and the reactions they got were night and day. And as we're looking at in these sources, especially the My Favorite Murders podcast, it makes you wonder why.
Right. And the host of that podcast, she grew up in Petaluma. And she brings up this point that Georgia Lee Moses was black.
It's uncomfortable to think about, but it's true. And it seems like her story, it didn't grab the media or the public the same way Paulie Klaas's did.
And it makes you ask some hard questions about how race and even like someone's background, how those things play into how we see crime. Like, why did one case become this national obsession and the other one just kind of faded away?
It's a really disturbing thought, especially since both of these murders happened in the same small town, not that far apart in time.
Right. It makes you think, what if Georgia Lee Moses' case had gotten all that support, all that media attention? Would things have been different?
We can't know for sure, but it's hard not to think about it. And it forces us to look at the biases that might be there in our society. Like, are there reasons why certain cases, certain victims get more attention and empathy than others?
It's like justice isn't always fair. It's not always blind. And it makes you realize that certain stories, they just grab people's attention more than others. But there is something good that came out of Georgia Lee Moses' story. It wasn't completely forgotten.
Yeah, Tom Waits, the musician, he lived in Petaluma and he wrote a song about her. It's this haunting melody that keeps her memory alive.
It's like art stepping in to give a voice to someone who might have been silenced.
Exactly. It's powerful. And it shows that even when something terrible happens, people want to remember, they want to honor the victims, make sure their stories are heard.
And even though Paulie Klaas and Georgia Lee Moses' cases got such different reactions, they both show how much crime can affect a whole community, especially a place like Petaluma where everyone knows each other.
They shatter that feeling of safety, that idea that these things don't happen in places like that.
And they make us face some hard truths about how we see things, our own biases even, and the systems that might be letting these injustices happen. But there's another case that really adds to this conversation about how people react to violence. The Kitty Genovese case.
Oh yeah, that one's famous. It happened back in 1964 in New York City. It's the case that everyone uses to talk about the bystander effect.
The idea that when there are more people around, we're less likely to help someone in trouble.
Exactly. Everyone thinks that 38 people watched Kitty Genovese get attacked and murdered and no one did anything to help. But My Favorite Murder episode, they used this 2015 documentary called The Witness, and it turns out the truth is a lot more complicated.
It's not as simple as everyone thought.
Right. The episode goes deeper and you find out that a lot of those so-called witnesses, they didn't actually see everything that happened.
So they didn't know how serious it was.
Some people thought it was a fight between a couple or a bar fight. Some only saw little bits and pieces of it.
And the episode makes this important point that people did call the police.
Yeah, but it took them forever to get there because back then there wasn't a 911 system like we have now.
That's crazy to think about.
I know. That system, it came about because of this case.
Wow. So it's like this whole re-examination of a case that everyone thought they knew.
Yeah.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about how people act in those situations.
Right. Is it really just apathy? Or are there other things going on that we don't understand unless we're in that situation ourselves?
That's a good point. And the episode gets into the psychology of the bystander effect, like how having more witnesses around can actually make it less likely that anyone will help.
It's like this diffusion of responsibility. We think someone else will do something and then no one does.
It's almost like we get paralyzed trying to figure out what to do, and then valuable time is lost.
It's tragic. But the episode also looks at how society was back then and how that might have affected what the witnesses did or didn't do.
That's an interesting angle.
Yeah, for example, some people in Kitty Genovese's building were Holocaust survivors. And someone in the documentary said that their experiences taught them to not get involved, to not attract attention, especially when it came to the police.
That's a powerful point. Like our actions, they're shaped by our experiences, by our backgrounds.
Exactly. The bystander effect, it's not just about not caring. It's about fear trauma and all these social things that we might not even realize are influencing us.
It makes you realize that there's always more to the story.
Yeah.
And it challenges us to look beyond those simple explanations and to really think about why people act the way they do, especially in a crisis.
And something that really stuck with me was finding out that Kitty Genovese's friend, a neighbor, she did help her. She held her as she was dying.
Well, it's like a little bit of light in this really dark story. It shows that even in those moments, there are people who choose to do the right thing, to comfort someone, to be there when others might turn away.
It shows that empathy is powerful. It's that goodness inside of us that's still there even when we see the worst of humanity.
It reminds us that we're not alone. And even though we might question why some people didn't help, we can find some comfort knowing that someone did. That there's still hope, even in a story that's so tragic.
It's a good reminder. And it brings us back to those cases in Petaluma, Polly Klaas, and George Lee Moses. They both led to big changes in law enforcement. And then you have Kitty Genovese's case, which was awful, but it gave us the 9/11 system. It's fascinating how these things that seem so separate can have such a huge impact on the whole country.
It's like a domino effect.
It shows how connected we all are, how something that happens in one place can cause changes across the country, and those changes end up helping everyone.
It's like we're all part in this big web of humanity. And what we do or don't do, it matters. It has
Yeah.
consequences.
And that's something to remember, especially now with everything going on in the world. Even when things are bad, when there's darkness and despair, there's always a chance for things to get better, for progress to come out of pain, for hope to shine through.
It's like proof that we can be resilient, that we can find ways to make things better, to find meaning and purpose even when we face incredible loss.
Exactly. It's the human spirit at its best. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the people who did these terrible things. Richard Allen Davis, Polly Klaas's abductor and murderer, and Winston Moseley, the man who killed Kitty Genovese. They both have these chilling backstories that make these stories even more complicated. Their stories are just chilling. You know, going through all of this, what really hit me, and my favorite murder episode really brought this out, was how amazing the community response was.
Yeah, like even in the middle of something so horrible.
It's like when things are at their darkest, you see all this love and support, this refusal to let fear take over.
It's inspiring. Think about Petaluma. Everyone rallying around the Claus family, all those purple ribbons, people searching everywhere. Winona Ryder going on TV and pleading for Polly's return.
It shows you what people can do when they come together. When they all feel that same grief and that need for justice, it reminds us that even in the darkest times, we're not alone.
It gives you hope. And it wasn't just about catching the guy. It was about being there for the victims, for Polly's family. And that's where organizations like the Polly Klaas Foundation come in.
They took all that pain, all that sadness, and turned it into something good. Something that could help other families from going through the same thing.
It's incredible. That foundation started in Polly's memory. They've done so much to push for laws to protect kids and to give support to families with missing children.
They've actually found thousands of missing kids because of their work.
That's amazing. It's like Polly's legacy, this amazing thing coming out of something so awful. It shows that even in the worst times, there are people out there fighting for good, trying to help those who need it most. And actually, this is personal for me. Polly's mom, she was my boss for a while.
Wow. That must have been so hard being so close to that tragedy, seeing how it affected her family and the whole community.
It was. But it also showed me how strong people can be, how resilient. Even after something so unthinkable, the way everyone supported each other was amazing.
It's like proof that we're not powerless when bad things happen. We can take all that grief, that anger, and use it for something positive. We can support groups like the Polly Klaas Foundation or the Black and Missing Foundation.
They're doing such important work, bringing attention to missing people of color, people who often don't get the same attention.
Exactly. It's about speaking up, using what we have to make a difference to stop these things from happening again.
These cases, Polly's and Georgia Lee Moses's, they make us look at the whole picture of crime, how it affects everyone, not just the victims.
And they make us think about the things in our society that might be causing these tragedies. The problems, the biases, the inequalities that make some people more vulnerable than others.
It's about asking tough questions about safety, about justice, about what we do when we see something bad happening.
Like, how would we react? Would we be the one who steps in, who tries to stop it, who actually makes a difference? It's about taking responsibility, being aware, and speaking up when something's wrong.
That's so true. We hear about the bystander effect, but what really makes us decide to act or to just stand there and watch? Would we be braver in a small town than in a big city?
It's something to think about. The next time we see something that just feels off, that makes us uncomfortable.
Like a gut feeling that something's not right?
Hmm.
Do we trust that feeling? Do we
Mm.
have the courage to speak up to do something?
These cases remind us that we're all connected. What we do or don't do, it has an impact. And even when things seem hopeless, the human spirit can still find a way to be kind, to keep going.
It's about holding on to hope, believing that we can make things better, that even small actions can change the world.
That's a powerful message. And it's one we all need to hear, especially these days. It's a call to action, a reminder that we're not just watching the world go by, we're a part of it.
And the choices we make every day, they matter. They can change things for ourselves and for everyone around us. So let's choose hope. Let's choose to care. Let's choose to make a difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It was heavy stuff, but I think we all learned something important today.